Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to have with me today Steve Patterson, philosopher, and we're going to talk about morality and philosophy and whatever our conversation leads to. Steve, welcome,
Thanks for having me on.
and thanks for joining. Would you just tell my audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, I guess it was 12 years ago now. I started down the path of independent philosophy professionally. I had worked at some nonprofits. I had an underwhelming academic experience, worked at some nonprofits, and then had an underwhelming experience there too. And so thought, okay, I'm gonna have a go at doing independent philosophy. Started a podcast called Patterson in Pursuit, where I've traveled around the world interviewing a gigantic range of people on a ton of different topics, mostly professors. Um, it's taken me from Harvard and Oxford to I've talked to Buddhist monks in Thailand and Japan. So it's been kind of a whirlwind tour examining things that I'm curious about in my own philosophical journey. And then I wrote a few books. Wrote a book on philosophy called "Square One: The Foundations of Knowledge," which is a short book about logic. And I've been split brain for a while because I've been working on Bitcoin stuff for a long time as well. Wrote a few books on that subject, but that's kind of my overview.
Excellent. Well, I know that today we are tentatively scheduled to talk about morality and its foundations, but of course that's going to lead to all sorts of other things. You can't go into that rabbit hole without finding other holes. But let's go ahead and start there. Now, my understanding is that you recently started possibly transitioning from, I think, atheism toward Catholicism. Is that correct?
Halfway. So I was never. Oh, I shouldn't say this. So I was an atheist for about no more than 30 seconds. It's a funny story.
Huh.
Happy to talk about if you want to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So my parents were Christian evangelicals, and uh, in that world, I was I, it was encouraged to think independently about your ideas and ask questions until the questions were really annoying and the pastor and the authority figures couldn't have snappy responses to your questions, and then sometimes the questions were not as welcome. So I credit to my mother. She was totally open-minded, totally on the pursuit of truth and in supportive of going wherever the truth leads. But in general, I didn't find that world. Something was wrong in Christian evangelicalism in my experience. But I thought the character of Jesus is very, very important. I couldn't get rid of Jesus. So fast forward to um, well, um, I'll fast forward to Catholicism and I'll tell you the atheism story. So I had a religious experience with my wife, or the woman that's soon to be my wife, back in 2011, and that was life changing. The experience of love, true love, for the first time, that came connected to an experience with Jesus, but I didn't really understand how to make sense of it. And so for like 15 years, I've been trying to make sense of that experience. And I I thought I was on the trajectory of being in a denomination of Christianity that would have like one member. I would be the Pope in my denomination, and I would have this metaphysics sorted and the epistemology sorted, and like, okay, this everybody's wrong except my version of Christianity, true to the Protestant spirit. And then a few years ago, I started examining Catholicism for the first time. Somehow, like the biggest, oldest tradition of the biggest, oldest religion had just eluded me. I thought it was just self-evidently impossible that Catholics could be right about things. The pattern I had seen across domains in my many domains of research is that the mainstream, if you will, for lack of a better term, is essentially always wrong, and all their ideas are foolish. And so the idea that like Catholics would be right, it didn't even strike me as a possibility. So I guess I just didn't really investigate it. Anyway, after investigating, I'm like, oh, this is actually way better than the thing I was building. This answers almost every question. And so yeah, I'm in the process of converting right now. Okay, I will tell you, I've never told anybody this atheism story, but it's really funny. So true story. So I was living in Atlanta. This would have been 2010. This was actually not that long before this religious experience, and I was doing research on philosophy, and I was always persuaded by a couple of arguments for the existence of God. Most importantly was well, it has many different names, but let's call it the cosmological argument. The idea that you can't logically have an infinite regress. And so you have to have a first cause, an unmoved mover. It's been called many different things. Because I had previously established my worldview on logic, that I care about truth, and I am absolutely convinced that logic is inextricably linked with truth. And so, if there's a logical problem with an infinite regress, and the only answer is something that sounds like God, even if it's a deistic God or whatever, it has to be something with particular unique properties that answers the infinite regress problem. I thought, okay, well then I guess I'm at the very least that there's an argument for a God that I find totally persuasive. So anyway, I'm doing research on this, and I remember coming across a YouTube video, and it was something like 12 arguments against the existence of God. Okay, and it had a clock face, and it was going through. The first argument was 1 o'clock, second argument 2 o'clock, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 12. And I found, I listened to like, I don't know, 8 of them. And I thought, these are actually really good. I really like all these arguments. And then I saw on the clock face, it said, the argument for the infinite regress argument, it was like 11 or 12. And I thought, wow, I like this guy's style of argumentation so much. Maybe the infinite regress argument is wrong as well. And so, but instantly, because I tend to be an extremely skeptical person, I converted to atheism for 30 seconds, and I'm like, no, but what about this? And I'm like, okay, no, this can't be like, no, the atheism thing doesn't work. So anyway, I get to the end of the video, and I swear I wish I could find this video because it's so funny. He goes, the guy was making this argument. He says, well, and then, because he's talking about his own personal experience and losing faith. And he said, and then, well, then I realized after all of these other 11 arguments that I was confused by all of those before too. So I just assumed, well, I must be wrong about the infinite regress argument as well. And he just totally glossed over. He didn't make any argument whatsoever to engage the one argument that I thought was the indefeatable one, which was the argument for the infinite regress. And I was like, okay, yeah. So that was my 30-second excursion into atheism.
That's very interesting. We have a similar background, by the way. So my father's an Episcopal minister, so I grew up in that environment. And like your mother, he was not pushy, and it was totally, he advocated independent thinking and my making my own decisions. So he wasn't a Bible thumper or trying to force me to accept anything. And Episcopalians are kind of the hippies of Christianity anyway, or
Yeah.
among the hippies of
Right.
Christianity. They, anything goes kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
So I did, I sort of grew up in that environment, and of course I've heard all of the arguments for God and have wrestled with those in various ways. But since you bring up the first cause argument, or the infinite regress there, let's talk about that for a minute,
Yeah.
because what is it that you see is infinitely regressing in terms of the first cause? Like, why is there an infinite regress there?
Yeah,
In
so
your
there's several different lines you could take. One that I find persuasive is temporal regress. So I say that there is such a thing as temporal progression taking place. That implies there is some um, time is some kind of real phenomenon. And when I think about the fact that event B is preceded by event A, then I ask, well, is event A preceded by anything? And we end up with it's either the case that there is an infinite series of temporal events, or there isn't. And if there were an infinite series of temporal events, then I don't think you get any progression along an infinite timeline. So I don't think that. I think Zeno, for example, actually had correct logic in his arguments for Zeno's paradoxes. One of his premises are wrong, and his paradoxes of motion, but his logic is actually correct. So because I don't think an infinite temporal regress makes sense, say, well, it must be the case that one way of putting it is uh, it must be the case that there is some type of reality or existence which is atemporal, and that's something. It's not something I experience, so it's some transcendent type of existence which is not subject to temporal change.
So, what about the idea that the universe or existence is eternal, that time is not outside of the universe, but within the universe, that time is measurement of things in motion? So then you have, if you fuse this idea with the conception of causality being that things have natures or identities, they have qualities that make them what they are, and they act in accordance with those identities. So a cloud forms because of the nature of water and heat and sun and the relative natures of air versus water, and then snowflakes fall and take form based on the nature of water and cold and
Hmm.
gravity, etc. So things act in accordance with their natures. Why do we have to assume that 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 there's a problem with infinite regress when we just say, look, things exist, they act in accordance with their identities, and they have always existed. When we bring in time or anything, any discussions of anything being temporal, all we're doing is talking about measuring things within existence, not measuring the time during which existence existed itself. How would you address that
Yeah, well, there's a
objection?
lot. There's a lot in there when you're talking about
Yeah,
natures and properties, and that's going to be very, very heavy metaphysics. Happy to talk about, but that's going to be. I'm gonna end up, I think, disagreeing with a lot of how that's framed. But let me try an answer, and we'll see if this answers your question. So I'm going to
sure.
say that the fact that there is temporal progression at all, regardless of how that relates to objects, the fact that there are state changes, uh, uh, I would say, in fact, you could, in my view, this is not a universal view, but in my view, you can have temporal progression even without motion. The analogy would be something like, if you think about a computer, even if everything that is, let's say, being generated on your computer screen is static, it just no pixels are changing. You could still have temporal progression even without those without motion, without anything happening on the screen. So I'd say, in my mind, it seems possible that you could have temporal progression without motion. But that's neither here nor there. The fact that we have temporal progression means we can ask questions. Well, what preceded event X? Well, what preceded, event Y? What
So
preceded?
preceded, but not necessarily caused. So you're just
Yeah,
talking about,
yeah.
okay,
The fact
time
that
alone,
there,
not causation.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The fact that there is temporal progression means we're going to end up with an infinite regress problem, because you just say, okay, well, uh, is there any state which was not preceded by a previous temporal state? And if the
See,
if
I have,
yeah,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, if the answer is no, there is no state that was not preceded by another temporal state. I'm going to say that generates paradoxes. Then you don't actually get the progression of one state to another. You have an infinite regress problem. If the answer is yes, there was a state which is not preceded by another temporal state, then you're talking about atemporality. And if you're in the world of atemporality, I think you end up needing the fact that we have time means we need atemporality logically. And if that's the case, then I'm going to say that is part of the domain or the transcendent reality in which there is God, because I don't experience anything that's atemporal. That's something that's totally outside of my regular senses. And yet I think it's like logically necessary.
Interesting. So I think that these seeming paradoxes are resolved by understanding that existence is primary. The existence exists, has always existed. If you want to bring
But
the concept
always,
of
you're putting a lot
time,
into that always.
I,
Yeah.
I was just going to say. I
Yeah.
was just going to say. So always sounds temporal, but the if you think of it this way, existence exists, and we measure motion of things that exist, and that's what that's those are the facts that give rise to the concept of time.
Okay. So
Time does not.
let me just ask on there. So is the in that view, are you saying if there were no measurement of time, there wouldn't be any temporal progression?
No, there's temporal progression among things in the universe acting in accordance with their natures, but there's no problem of existence having existed for eternity. So existence is eternal. Time is the measurement of things in motion in the universe. If we weren't here to measure things in motion, would things still be in motion? Yes. But time is a concept that human beings created to denote the measurement of motion. So the Earth spins once on its axis. We call that 24 hours. We can use that measure to talk about days and years. And the Earth revolves around the sun in 365 days, and we can call that a year. You can take a foot and say, well, we're going to use this as the unit of measurement and measure distances. So all of this is measurement of some sort. And sans a measurer, there are no measurements, and time wouldn't exist as a concept, but it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be progressions of things without us being here. So I have no
Okay,
problem.
that's the part I'm confused on, because it sounds like you're saying on the one side, of the one hand, time is entirely measurement dependent, but then on the other hand, you're saying even if there were no measurement, because there are no measurers, there would still be time.
Yeah, I don't think you should conflate motion or sequences with time. If no one was here, the Earth would still be traveling around the sun, right? It would still be, and it would still be spinning on its axis. I have no problem with that. And there would be progressions, but there would be no one to measure any of these progressions. So the idea of time, well, no ideas would exist because there wouldn't be anybody to have ideas. But time is specifically the concept that we use pertaining to measurement of motion, not
Well,
merely motion.
that does okay. Well, I don't think that's right. So I think if packed into the notion of motion is time. Motion doesn't make any sense without time. Motion is a way of saying at time one, state one, at time two, state two.
Oh, I don't think that time makes sense without motion, but I think motion could exist with no one measuring it. So
Yeah.
I'm just
Well, what I'm saying is that motion doesn't make sense without time.
yeah.
What motion is a way of saying there was a position and state oh, here, and then time two, time 10, or whatever, there's a different position and state. So like all motion is 100% wrapped up in the phenomena of time.
So you're
Right.
conflating those, and I'm trying to separate them. And I think we may just disagree there. I think you can
Well,
have progression without anyone measuring the progression.
I think the conflation is that you're trying to say that you're talking about the measurement as if it's the thing that actually exists. So that there's the measurement, but I'm saying, okay, what's the thing being measured? And I want to
Well,
say
I'm
that
not saying measurement is the thing that exists. I'm saying progression is the thing that exists. And whether we're
okay,
here or not, that
okay.
happens.
So and what I'm saying is, if progression temporal or motion, whatever, if progression is a real phenomenon, then progression is going to bake in time. The phenomenon of progression bakes in time into it. There is no meaning in the concept of progression without time. And so if time then is baked into how what's happening in the world, the earth really is revolving around the sun without us, then you still have the infinite regress problem.
Okay, so let's set time aside and just focus on progression. So
Okay.
if we're not here to measure it, I think there's no time, there's just progression. But that's beside the point for the issue of infinite regress. So you're saying you can't have progression go back forever. And I dispute that. I think that if
What is
existence,
forever?
well, so you could say infinitely if you want, but it can keep going back, whether anybody measures it or not. The existence. So take the formation of Earth. So if there's no one there to observe or measure how that happens, does it still happen? My answer would be yes, because existence exists regardless of whether consciousness is there to perceive it. And so I think that does happen. And can things happen in stages? Yes. So there's progression in that sense. But here's where I don't think the infinite regress that you think is a problem is a problem. If you say, well, look, in order for things to happen, there has to be a first thing that happened. Why? If things are happening because of the nature of the entities that exist, and if existence exists, things are just going to act in accordance with their natures and their identities. Things can move around. They can, forces like gravity and the various laws of nature, laws meaning things acting in accordance with their natures, not human beings forming those laws. So that's I
Okay,
realize
so
that.
put it this way then. Here's I think an answer to the question is that the fact that there is a present moment implies that there cannot be an infinite sequence of previous present moments.
I
And
don't see why that is.
well, we'll talk about motion and Zeno's paradoxes, and then I think that will answer the question. So, classical issue that Zeno brought up. He said, there's different examples of Zeno's paradox, but let's just say there's a runner, and he's trying to go from the start line to the finish line, and before he can go from A to Z, he has to cross a halfway point, and then let's call that let's just say it's point J. But in order to go from point J to point Z, he has to cross another halfway a point, so that's the 3/4 mark. And then, but in order to go from the 3/4 mark to the halfway to the end, he has to do another halfway and another half step and another half step. And the question is, can he go through an infinite series of midway marks and actually reach the final destination? And Zeno said he can't. There's a logical problem here. One way of understanding it would be to say, at every step along the way, there is an infinite number of points remaining between him and the final destination. Because that at every step of the way, he is going step by step by step. Therefore, that means he can logically never arrive at the end of the race. That is correct logical reasoning. The issue with Zeno's paradoxes is that it assumes the infinite divisibility of space. So if you have a base unit of space, then Zeno's paradoxes go away, and there's no issue anymore. And that's a repulsive idea to a lot of people, to think that space is fundamentally discrete. I think it has to be fundamentally discrete. But if that reasoning is valid, then the same is going to apply for temporal progression. So is it the case that you have an infinite number of temporal present moments to the left? Well, if that couldn't be the case, because we've actually arrived at the present moment now, and we can't arrive by going through a series of present moments that are infinite. That's why it's not that. I think the argument is backwards when we're trying to say, well, you have to have a first cause in order to have the way that you framed it, I think is backwards. It's more like, given the fact that we have a chronological progression of present moments, it must therefore be that we must have atemporality. We can't have an infinite series of temporal events.
So yeah, Zeno's paradoxes are really helpful to think through this stuff, but I think they actually support my position. So I actually used this example recently in a debate with Alex O'Connor about free will. You take Zeno's paradox, which uh, if distance is infinitely divisible, then you simply cannot cross the stage. But I got up and walked across the stage, and I asked the audience, "Did I walk across the stage?" And they say yes. And I said, "Well, that's because reality is primary, and our mathematical calculations or tools or measurements are not. You measure what is. You don't measure the imaginary things you come up with in your mind. So if you go, well, look, space must be divisible infinitely because I'm thinking of it that way in my mind. But if you start with reality, you see that space is not infinitely divisible. Otherwise, nothing could ever touch anything, right? So, or no distances could ever be closed, and no distances could ever. Everything would be solid. Everything would be still, a la Parmenides, right? So you'd have this problem that there's no motion, nothing moves at all.
Yeah, well, that would be right. So you can have motion with a static discrete space. So just like you can have a computer screen where the pixels aren't themselves moving, you still have motion on the computer screen. It's just that you have state transmission across a grid. So so you end up with motion. It just works differently than a simple model would suggest.
Yeah, for
So
motion to exist, something has to move. And this goes to my point about causation, which is causality isn't, things don't happen because of prior events. Things happen because of the nature of entities. So if things exist, they're simply going to act in accordance with their natures, whatever they are, whether it's a snowflake, a human being, or a river. It's going to act in accordance with its nature in relation to the relative natures of other things, the earth, stones, whatever they interact with. And in my view, you don't need any quote starting point for this motion to begin because things just exist and act in accordance with their natures. I think you're
where did the natures
reifying
come from?
measurement. Well, let me get 2 points out real quick and
Yeah.
see what you think of these.
Yeah.
I think it's to reify measurement, is to treat measurement as a thing rather than a conceptual tool. When you say, well, there must be a way, there's either an infinite regress of this thing we're going to call measurement, or there has to be a first thing that moved. And my answer to that is no. Things are going to act in accordance with their identities, and things qua existence have always existed. There's no way that if you say there was a time when things didn't exist, then you're reifying the zero. You're saying nothing is a specific kind of thing that existed before existence existed. But that's reifying a zero. That's saying this thing called nothing is a special kind of existent. Existence exists, always has. There's no getting before existence because time is a measurement of things in existence. Existence itself is eternal. Now, this is my theory. I'm not trying to bark this at you. But I'm curious as to how your conception of time and regress deals with the idea that things have natures and are simply acting in accordance with their natures. So you don't need a first cause. You just have things that have acted in
Where did
accordance
the
with their
natures
nature.
come from? Where did natures come from?
Why would there have to be a starting point for the natures? Because now we're going to get into
I'm
special
not saying
pleading.
starting point. I'm just saying things have natures. Okay, why are there things and why are there natures?
So why is there something rather than nothing is what we have here.
That would be
The idea.
a more general way of putting it, but you're saying so I can talk about there being a reality in which there aren't things with natures. That's a very particular picture of what reality is. So I'm saying, okay, I don't think it's the right place to start talking about things and natures, but fine. Where do things come
What would
from?
be a thing without? What would be a thing without a nature, though? I'm confused on that.
So there are philosophers who think that there aren't things, plural. There's one thing. So there is one that what they want to say is that our minds are carving up undifferentiated existence and then telling stories about it, but there aren't a plurality of things with a plurality of natures, because then you have this terribly difficult problem of how you're unifying a nature with a thing. And it just seems, if you're concerned about reification, there's reification problems there everywhere. And you're saying what a thing is and what a nature is. Like, how does a thing relate to its nature?
Well, the nature of a thing is simply the qualities and characteristics that make it what it is. So you and
Okay,
I,
what
for
is it?
instance,
So, like a characteristic. What's a characteristic?
it's a quality that a thing has. So you and I, for instance, have consciousness, and my desk does not. You and I are biological, and the rock outside is not. So, I mean, there things have natures, meaning that they have qualities that make them what they are, and this is how we form concepts. Like you couldn't have a concept of dog if dogs didn't have a nature that you're going to capture in the concept in the way
Oh,
that you form
oh, interesting.
concept.
So, you're not a materialist then?
Oh no, no, no. I think there's both a physical existence and consciousness, non physical existence.
Okay, physical existence. Well, this is okay. This is interesting. This is the rabbit hole we need to go. We need to go
Let's go
down.
down it then. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. How's
Um,
that? Uh,
so,
and-
but to put a bit of a bow on there, and I think we're going to remain in disagreement on this, which is fine. The goal of the conversation like this is to come to agreement on everything. Is just to try to get clear on what our positions are. Um, I, I don't think that Zeno's paradoxes in any way uh, create a problem about whether existence has a starting point. Um, for existence to have a starting point, that would have to mean that there was a time where there was no existence, which gives us two impossibilities:
yeah,
that existence came
but
from
it's
nothing.
framed wrong. That whole thing, that way is framed wrong. That's I think that's a straw man. That's a straw man argument. The issue is about temporal progression. So one will a sophisticated view of God, for example, a classical Catholic position is that God uh, is his inherent nature is being itself. So there's no it would be impossible to talk about existence or being outside of God. So to
Well,
say there was a
unless
time that there wasn't existence is like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It has to be that everything. It's just that what the traditional position wants to say is that given that there are these regress problems, everything that we see is in fact grounded in a transcendental type of being, which is atemporal. So you don't have an existence prior to existence. You have eternal being that has certain necessary properties. And within the context of eternal being, which is they understand as God, then you get material reality. And within material reality, you have things like temporal progression, causal interaction among atoms, for example, if that's the way that the world works. But it's all still grounded in transcendent being.
So to me, that to use Aristotelian term on this, that's senseless duplication. We already have existence. We're perceiving it. We're experiencing it. We live in it. And then we're going to say there's got to be something else that made this possible, or we're going to give it another name. If you're going to say God is simply being, well, that's multiplying concepts beyond necessity. We already have the concept of being or existence. Why add the concept God to it?
Well,
That doesn't
no, I mean,
do any
but both of
work.
those, both of those are incorrect. Both of those are very incorrect. So, yeah, with the first one, the the point of this concept is to say that we're trying to explain reality. The point of God in this conception is to try to explain reality.
The
And we,
existence of reality or how things happen in reality? Which one of those?
um,
Or both?
well, it would be both. So we're just trying to explain our experiences, our sensations, we are trying to explain how things relate to one another, how things must be. And we note that in our everyday experience, I have a glass of water here. There's certain behavior of objects like this. They break, they change over time. They're participating in some temporal progression, for example. And we say, okay, could it be that the ultimate cause of something like this, an actual explanation for this, is grounded in the same type of principles of matter which currently compose it? So, for example, do you get a full explanation of the phenomena of temporality by just talking about temporal things? Or do you get an infinite regress problem? They want to say, well, no, you get to talk about material objects, to talk about things that are changing, requires a framework of atemporality. So it's sort of like people make this mistake commonly when talking about like logic, and they'll talk about propositions, and they don't understand that all of their propositions are always, without exception, nestled in an unspoken framework of logic. So I make this claim in the book I wrote called Square One: The Foundations of Knowledge, and the claim is that logic and existence are inseparable. And I say that is necessarily true, but it can sometimes be hard to see why logic and existence are inseparable. In fact, you have many schools of thought of people saying, no, no, there are exceptions to logic, exceptions to the laws of logic, but they're just confused. So it's the same type of thing going on here, that if you sit down and think about materiality and temporal progression, it's not multiplying entities, or it's not multiplying concepts or anything like that. It's just understanding, well, it uh, uh, temporality does not explain itself. Materiality does not explain itself. These
Yeah, it
things
doesn't.
have to be grounded in a bigger framework of the atemporal, of the amaterial, of the universal, of the transcendent, because otherwise you don't actually have an explanation for them.
Okay, so there's a lot in there, and there are bigger disagreements because we definitely disagree on part of the thesis of your book, which is that logic and reality are what was the term you used?
Logic and existence are inseparable.
Inseparable. You see, I think logic is a tool of cognition, and
All
that
right.
existence can exist completely separate from it. And I think
Oh,
to say that logic
it,
exists out there or math exists out there is to reify
no,
them.
it's not out there. It's not out there.
Okay,
It's
so if
built in.
we didn't exist, would logic still exist?
Yes. So let me ask you. This is okay. We have like two rabbit holes. This one's now more urgent than the last one. We have to talk about consciousness
We have
and
plenty of time because
yes. Okay. Right. An infinite amount of time. Um, no. So this is really the way to go. So I will say um, uh, this is the most urgent conversation that must be had, is about the relationship between logic and existence. So um, could it be that existence could be contradictory in some way under any circumstances?
no, there are no contradictions in nature. So I would put it this way: the relationship of
Are you sure of that?
existence. Yes, because there's the law of identity. Things are what they are.
Okay.
But that's a conceptual law identifying a fact of reality that would be a fact even if there was no one to identify it.
Okay, hang on.
So
But didn't
this is
that
why I
didn't
think you need to. Well, let me finish the thought there
okay.
real quick, because I think the way that I'm thinking of this, things are what they are, and existence exists whether we're here to identify that or not. And then human beings come along, and in order for us to keep our minds connected to reality, we have to first identify that basic fact, the law of identity. Then you can form the law of non-contradiction, which is the law of identity stated in negative terms. a thing is, cannot be A and non-A at the same time and in the same respect. You get the law of excluded middle. A thing is either A or non-A at any given time in any given respect. You get the law of causality, which is a thing acts in accordance with its nature, in accordance with what it is. And so that rules out miracles and the like. And all of these laws are conceptual tools that are derived from the nature of reality, but they're not the same thing as the nature of reality.
Okay.
That's the way I would put it.
Yeah. So that sounds like the classical attempt to try to have it both ways with nominalism and realism with regards to universals. So I just want to be clear here. The law of identity. Okay. A thing is what it is. Are you saying this is, in fact, universally true without humans, or is that a conceptual thing?
Well, if there's no humans, there's no quote law, because laws are conceptual integrations of the way that things are.
Well, there's no
Legitimate
talking
laws.
about the law, but there's still, is
Yeah.
there any feature of existence? So this is like,
Would
we
the
have
earth be the earth? Would the earth be the earth if we were not here to say that? It would, but there would be no law about it because things would just be.
okay. So when you
And
think about, but I was asking about, uh, uh, can reality, can existence be in a contradictory state itself, separate from
I don't
us?
know what that would mean. Can you give me an example of what that would look like?
Yeah, well, I could say, I can try to. I've had this conversation. I'll appeal to an argument that was given to me by a professor at Columbia University, and he said, for example, this is going to be hard because he gave me two examples. One of them came from mathematics, with infinite sets, interestingly enough. And the other, he said, he was trying to give me an example of a logical contradiction. He said, for example, the Pope. Is the Pope married or is he unmarried? He said, well, he's married and unmarried at the same time. He's married to the church, and yet he's an unmarried man. That was supposed to be an example of a logical contradiction. And let's take that example for example. Let's say, what do you think of that argument? Do you think that would be a logic? That's an example of how reality can be logically contradictory?
No, because the law of non-contradiction has the additional clause at the same time and in the same respect. And that's
Agreed.
a very important aspect of the law. So
Agreed.
something can, yeah. So he's married to the church, so he's married in a certain
Yeah.
respect,
Yeah.
but he's not married to a woman, which would be married in another respect. And so there's no contradiction.
And one would imagine that a Columbia professor would have sorted this out in maybe 30 years
One would
prior.
imagine, but look, John Dewey writes a book on logic in which he says that the law of excluded middle doesn't hold for this exact same kind of reason.
Well, that one's a little bit different. That one's a little bit different because with the law of the excluded middle, you get into questions in the philosophy of language. If I say the present king of France is bald, is that true or is it false? Well, we have to at least give pause before we answer it. So carefully understood, I don't think there's any issue with the law of the excluded middle, but it can, ambiguities in language can come up there. But I really want to return to this. There's this consistent pattern here, which is that there's a concept, and then there's the thing in reality, and want to really try to avoid reifying the concept. And what I'm going to say is, well, what you're doing in the attempt to avoid reifying the concept is you're denying the reality of what the concept is supposed to map onto. So I'm going to say
Okay.
the laws of logic, though there might not be books written about the laws of logic, the law of identity. The law of identity is not merely a way of talking. It's not really a conceptual tool or conceptual convention. The law of logic is, in fact, an ontological principle built into the nature of being. What existence means is specifically existence. And that means identity. You can't have existence without identity. But I'm not
Existence
saying
is entity. I agree with that fully, but that would be the case whether we were here to formulate
agree.
sentences like existence exists.
Yes,
or
but
things
you're
are what
going
they
you're
are.
going you're going from the sentence, you're going from the claim about reality into the sentence, and you're worried about, well, it's a sentence, it's a sentence. Well, I'm saying, look at the claim. The claim is logic and existence are inseparable. Existence and identity are inseparable. In reality, doesn't matter if we say it or not. That's a claim
I
about
agree
reality
that
itself.
existence, I think we're in agreement that existence and identity are inseparable. Things would be
Okay.
what they are, whether we were here to say that or not.
Yeah.
But the laws of logic, as soon as you say the laws of logic, what you're doing is you're talking about conceptual identifications of facts of reality.
I'm not. Identity,
Okay.
the laws of
So you
logic.
think so you think the laws of logic exist apart from human conceptions of or integrations
Yes,
of the
we have a
things?
sure. It's a very similar to I really do think there's a cup here, and I
Yeah.
also have a concept of a cup. But even if I didn't have the concept, there really is a structure here. There is an objective
Yeah,
structure
but
out there existing.
the cup isn't a law, right? The cup is an entity.
Sure. Well,
Okay, so I'm just saying
an
that the entities and laws are distinct.
yeah. So whatever feature of reality is being described by the laws of identity and non-contradiction is mind independent. That's the claim. Okay.
I agree
Identity.
there in the sense that the thing exists whether we're here to say anything about it or not. In that sense, it
Yep.
is mind independent. But as soon as you say, look, because if I say to you, what's the law of excluded middle? And you then tell me what the law of excluded middle is, or the law of non-contradiction, take it either way. What you're doing is telling me, you're giving me a conceptual integration about the nature of things in reality. And that conceptual integration is related to, but distinct from the things that you're referring to. It has reference in reality, it has things that it refers to, but it's not the same thing as those things. This is why, for instance, I mean, otherwise concepts wouldn't. What does the concept of sarcasm refer to? Sarcasm isn't out there anywhere, but it's a real thing because we're able to form the concept. We know what we're talking about, and it's a relational concept.
Yeah, I
So the
think it's
whole
a real
business
thing.
of
There is
yeah,
such a
the
thing
whole
as sarcasm. Yeah.
there is, but it's not something you can go touch,
Yes,
right?
it's
It's not.
abstract.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah. So
So that's
but
what I'm
this
trying to get at.
yeah.
Is there are concretes and there are abstractions, and all of our concepts are abstractions. That's what a concept is.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to just say that there's a distinction there, and
Yeah.
are you
Well,
disagreeing that
no,
is
no. I
the
think
case?
well, let me ask you this question. Do you think that there are abstractions that can exist outside of the mind?
No.
Okay, well, this is where we're going to have to talk about the other rabbit hole, because this is
Yeah, cool.
yeah, this is also very important. Is so it sounds like your position would be that the only thing that exists are concretes and abstractions existing within our own minds.
Within our
There-
minds or any other conceptual being.
Okay,
If
let me
there are
ask you
other
then:
conceptual beings.
do you think that relations are abstractions and only exist within the mind?
Well, here again, there are facts like the Earth and its relationship to, say, the moon. So there's a certain quote distance. I can only use concepts to talk about this. So I'm not saying that the concept of distance exists if we're not here, but I'm saying the space or the relational the spatial relationship between the Earth and the moon is going to exist whether we're here to look at it or not. Now because we are here, we come up with things like the concept of distance or the concept of time or travel or whatever, and we use those concepts to refer to things that we observe. But the things would be there whether we were here to observe and create abstractions about them or not.
So what about causal relations? Do you think that
If
things
if
are
if we're
causally
not
related?
here,
No.
yeah, absolutely. If we're not here on the Earth and an asteroid hits the Earth and causes a huge explosion and a big crater, Did that happen? Well, yes, it did, but nobody observed it and no one is here to talk about it or record it. But it doesn't change the fact that it is. So this is why at, at the fundamental level, I think we have two axioms that we need to bear in mind: existence and consciousness. We know both are fundamental because you can't, we're using them all the time and we cannot deny either of them without affirming them. So there's the reaffirmation through denial. But they're also different things. Existence is primary and it can exist without consciousness. And consciousness is identification of existence. So the way Ayn Rand puts it is existence is identity and consciousness is identification. They're different things, but they coexist. And
Yeah.
one can exist without the other.
So let's try to keep pursuing this relation concept a little bit more, rather than there's the way that I don't know if that's an accurate reflection of Rand's position. If it is, then I would definitely take issue with the idea of consciousness as identification. I don't think that works, but let's just we'll table that one. Um,
Okay.
so let me ask you: do you think that in the material world, that, for example, atoms are interacting with one another?
Well, first of all, now we're getting into physics, which is not my field. So I will say, from my understanding of physics, my high school physics course, yeah, I think that that's the case. But look, I don't want to argue physics because it's not my
Okay.
area.
Well, let's
Philosophy,
yeah. Well, that we can just let's say, do objects interact with one another? Do you
sure.
think that objects?
If I watch a car stop at a stoplight and then go when the light turns green, did that happen? Yes. And if a car hits another car and has a
Okay.
collision, did that happen? Yes.
Okay. So do you think that separate from our minds, in the world, in reality, there are objects that are actually interacting with one another?
Yes. Whether we're here or not,
Okay.
the Earth is traveling around the sun.
Okay. So let's examine this concept of interactiveness. Do you think that interaction is inherently relational? So if you think about what interaction means, it implies, it seems, some type of relation between object one and object two, let's say.
Yeah, and this is the sense in which relationships exist, even if we're not here to form the concept of relationship and identify that fact.
Okay, but
So this
I, I
back
just,
to
I
the
just,
asteroids striking the Earth, there's a relationship there, whether we're here to identify it or not. The asteroid has a certain mass, the Earth has a certain mass,
yeah.
the wherever the asteroid hits the Earth, whether water or land, is going to have a certain characteristic, and the asteroid is going to cause the collision is going to cause certain things to happen based on the identities of the things that interact,
So
whether we're here or not. Yes.
I just want to be clear then. The claim is that there is interaction without the mind. There are relations without the mind, but I think we established previously that relations are abstract. So if
I'm not
relations are
saying that the concept of relation is abstract. Our
okay,
identifications of relations are abstractions,
okay.
but the relationships themselves, just like the entities themselves, exist apart from consciousness. This is why we need to distinguish
Well,
between existence and consciousness.
hang on. So the idea is that there that relations exist outside of our minds, and that they are not that they're concrete. So what is a relation outside of our minds? I think I can understand what a cup would be outside of our minds. There's the atoms, whatever. But when you say it, there's a relation, it seems to me that seems to be that you're saying relations, abstractions, some of them at least, have an existence that is both non-mental and yet abstract and real.
Yeah, there's a there are two parts to any identification. When we say relationship, and you ask me the question, What do you mean by relation or relationship? There are two simultaneous things going on. There's a fact that we're trying to capture, and we're trying to capture it conceptually. So there's a thing that exists, and then there's the effort to integrate into an idea the thing we're trying to capture and think about and talk about. So there a relationship between the asteroid and the planet that it hits? Yes, that relationship is the way in which these two things interact. That's a relationship, at least in that context.
Okay,
And then there's
but
the
that's a
question.
yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to
And then
say
there's
that.
the question of what do we as human beings call that, or how do we conceptualize it? And we do it this way. We name the things: asteroid, planet, collision, right? These are all concepts that we form and use to understand the nature of reality. But reality is what it is, and abstraction is our means of understanding and dealing with and ultimately using this knowledge to live. So this is why we can build things like spaceships and heart valves, is because we understand the nature of things, but we can also abstract uh, and build abstractions on abstractions, which human knowledge gets extremely abstract. I brought up just something like sarcasm earlier. That's a very abstract concept, and um, we as human beings are able to do this amazing thing, which is identify the existence of entities and how they act and interact, conceptualize that in form concepts and propositions and principles. And that's our way of dealing with the physical world that exists, whether we are here or not.
Okay, so I'm going to try to make a syllogism, and then see if you reject this. Okay, so here's one proposition here. All relations are abstract. What do you think about that?
I would disagree with that. And I would disagree with it because it depends on whether. So relations can be looked at in two ways. There is relations that exist, whether we're here or not, and that would be things like the asteroid hits the Earth and has a collision. They have a relationship. Something happens between these two entities, and that is a relation. But then there's the abstraction, namely the concept relation or the concept relationship, and that does not exist unless there's a
Okay,
human being
what's the
there to form it.
former? But so examine the former. You're saying we're not talking about language and are talking about things. We're not talking about sentences. You're
Yeah.
saying the asteroid hitting the Earth, there is substantive a relationship there. There is
Yeah.
there is
Something
the type of
happens.
okay, and you want to say though that it's not abstract. What right?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
so
think
so
an
what I'm saying is
abstract.
how do you get interaction between objects, which is uh, not abstract, like interaction itself is abstract relational, right?
Yeah.
So it's
I,
not, it's
I
you got
disagree
object
with that.
A. Okay, well, let's talk about that then. Yeah, because
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
here's how. Yeah, let me paint out like a picture of how the material world might operate, and then you can elaborate if this is incorrect. So you've got
Sure.
you've got an object one, and you've got an object two, and we could live in a world. We can conceive of the possibility that these two structures, as they exist in space, they get closer and they get closer, and they don't interact at all. The
Conceivability is not possibility. So I would want to draw a line there. You can conceive of things that aren't possible. So Walt Disney made a whole career on that.
Well, okay, that's its own other rabbit hole. But do you disagree that it is conceivable that you could have a situation in which there isn't interaction among objects that are colliding? that are getting or overlapping, let's say, in a spatial proximity. So if you think about it, just to give a vivid analogy, on the computer screen, I can imagine two blocks of pixels that, as they get together and they touch each other, they don't actually interact, right?
Well, pixels are difficult because pixels are man-made, and your computer screen can create visual appearances that are distinct from what is actually going on there. So you can have things look like they can happen when they can't.
Well,
Um,
and what I'm saying is we can imagine some universe in which the physics there is analogous to the physics on the computer screen. That you get
Yeah, you
objects
can.
that,
That's
yeah,
what Harry Potter does, right? That's what J.K.
right, right,
Rowling, when she writes the
right,
Harry
yes,
Potter books, she comes up with a universe where magic can happen.
yeah, yeah,
And
okay,
that's fine. I'm all for fantasy like that. It's lots of
okay,
fun. But
yeah.
but magic can't happen in reality. So there's pretending, and then there's pretending
Well,
that you're not pretending when you
that
are
that
pretending.
that ends up
And
being
that's
extremely complex because when you get outlier events that happen once every million years or so on, then it's going to look like magic. And just because we don't have a causal understanding of what's going on doesn't mean those things aren't real. We just don't have a
let's
grasp of
zero in on
exactly.
this. So let's try to
Well,
concretize
no,
this.
no,
Can
no,
you
wait, wait,
give
no,
me an
no, no.
example?
Okay.
I'm looking an example
Uh,
of a contradiction. I think are you arguing that contradictions can exist?
Absolutely not. I wrote
Okay.
the whole point
Okay.
of Square One. No, I just don't think that magic and contradiction are the same thing. I think if you brought a
Ah,
primitive person into the present moment when we talk into our little box and say, Siri, give her, deliver me lunch, and then whatever it does it, and then I get lunch. That they would view that as
yeah.
magic. It's just very
Absolutely they would.
sophisticated thing.
But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, but
If if we're defining magic as things that appear to be impossible but are actually causally understandable,
yeah, so that's
um, then
miracles.
we're fine.
That's miracles.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay,
That's
fine.
what I'm saying is
Um,
there's a whole classification of things that are miraculous that could just fall in that category. However, let's this is a very important thought experiment to get at what I'm talking about here with interaction being inherently abstract and relational and real and mind independent. Okay, so we're we're noting that it is possible that there could be a universe in which two objects pass through one another, let's say, without interacting. Okay. So then we will note, well, in this universe, that does not appear to be so. We live in a different universe where you don't have the passing through phenomenon. And so then the first question would be, why is that different? Like, why should it be that there is that difference there? Is there an explanation for the fact that in this universe, we do have interaction, and in another universe we could have interaction, we could not have interaction. So why should it be we have to have some reasonable explanation for why things interact in this universe?
so I think the question why presupposes the laws of identity and causality. I don't think you can. So it would be a stolen concept to ask, why does
Okay.
the law of identity and the law of causality hold? When you ask the question why, you're saying, what is it about this thing or this interaction or this relationship? What is it about the nature of the things and the way that they causally interact that gives rise to what I'm witnessing here? So I don't think you can legitimately ask the question why are things the way that they are at the fundamental level. In terms of, I mean, you can ask why does the United States exist as a constitutional republic, and why is it falling apart? You can ask those kinds of questions, but you can't ask why does the law of causality or the law of identity hold. The concept of why is a query that is rooted in and aimed at
That's a
explanatory.
that's a tangent. So here's what I'm trying to get at. Okay,
Okay, then I
I'll
may
just
have
try to
misunderstood.
yeah, I'll just try to jump to the conclusion of where I'm going here. The reason that we're in this universe and not that universe can be understood in the context of the laws of physics. So we would say, well, in that other universe in which there isn't interaction, The laws are different. We have laws here that govern how things interact, and in a fictional universe or a different universe, they might have different laws. And so that's what I'm trying to get at here. Now, the issue is the laws of physics. If you want to say the laws of causality, I'm very scared of that type of phrasing. But let's say if you examine those laws, you're going to find those are abstract. Those are not merely, you're describing something. It's something that's real and integral to how we explain everything. And yet it's also something that's mind independent. Yes, we can talk about the laws of physics in terms of sentences and our descriptions of them, but it actually is mapping onto something which is real and abstract, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I have no. Well, for I want to come back to the two universes thing or the alternate universes thing in a minute, but I have no problem with the fact that there is a world and that existence exists and that things act in certain ways and not in other ways, and they interact in certain ways and not in other ways, whether we're here to identify that or not. We happen to be here to identify it. And one of the fundamental ways in which we identify it is by forming abstractions that identify this fact. And the laws of identity, causality, non-contradiction, excluded middle, and so on are those very laws. They are abstractions, but the observations of which they are integrations are of actual things. If we see an asteroid strike
Okay,
a planet,
causality. What is
that
the
happened.
thing? What is the thing? What is the feature of reality that is being described by the law of causality?
So the law of causality is a generalization about all existence. It's an axiomatic. It's an axiom. The things are what they are is a conceptual integration of our observation of everything.
But I'm not
You can't look.
talking about our observations. I'm saying in the world, if you want to say that the law of causality is describing a real feature of the universe separate from our minds, saying what is that real feature? What is it like? If you're saying it's not abstract, what is it
Yeah,
like?
all I can do there is point to the instances that the law is developed and devised and used to integrate. So I point to an apple and I say, this apple is an apple. It is not at the same time a snake. I point to I point to a woman and I say, this is a woman. She can become a CEO. She cannot become a pillar of salt. So this is what it means. So when we form the concept or the law of identity or the law of causality, what we're doing is we're saying there's something about the nature of everything that exists that we're trying to capture. And what is that thing? A, things are what they are, and B, they act in accordance with their identities. This gives us a conceptual grounding that enables us to check our other thinking against this conceptual grounding, and enables us to keep our thinking connected to reality. So, for instance, miracles. When somebody says, "Well, a stick turned into a snake," or a bush spoke, or whatever, you can say, "No, that's not true," and it doesn't matter how many eyewitnesses claim to say that it is true. It's a violation of the fundamental law that we know subsumes all things. And
Huh?
that's the purpose of the laws of
How
identity
do
and
you know the
causality.
nature of a stick? How do you figure that out?
We know the nature of any given thing by observing it, handling
Okay,
it,
and so we
using.
observe it. So if it's through experience, then we say, all right, well, and once every 10,000 years, sticks apparently turn into frogs, and we know that by observing it. And then when that happens once every 10,000 years, somebody sits around and says, well, no, that can't be the case because that violates the nature of the thing. Well, but if the nature of the
When you
thing is
say once every
discovered by
10,000 years, stick turn
yeah,
into frogs, are you talking about evolution or are you talking about a miracle? I'm not.
no, I'm saying if you want to claim that we know the natures of things by observing them, and you want to say that miracles are a priori impossible, What I'm saying is, well, that's not a good argument, because if rare things happen every once so often, that can be reflective of an inherent nature of a thing that you only discover once every 500 years or once every 1,000 years. So you have to be open-minded to say, well, we don't absolutely know the nature of things because we haven't observed everything for all time and all contexts.
Yeah, so I disagree that with that kind of skepticism that we can't form and be certain of fundamental principles such as the laws of identity, causality,
So
non-contradiction.
I'm 100. I am the most extreme, like logical necessitarian you're ever going to find. I strongly recommend Square One: The Foundations of Knowledge. There are no exceptions to the laws of identity and non-contradiction. What I'm
But
saying
what
is,
about causality? I think the one you're wrestling with here is causality.
what I'm
Can a
saying,
thing act in contradiction to its nature?
no, my question is, how do we know the natures of things? If you want to say we know the natures of things and we figure them out by observing, then you can't. Then if a group of people, if 10,000 people say, oh, we observed this phenomena that didn't meet our expectations, then you have to adjust your understanding of the nature of the thing. So you're just ruling out, you're
So,
just saying, well, there can't, well, it would be a miracle. It's like, well, no, we're just observing the natures of things. And every once in a while, for maybe it could be some unknown causal interaction with the arrangement of the stars that only happens once every 500 years or 1,000 years. I don't know. But the idea that you're going to sit and say, no, that's logically impossible because I know the nature of a thing through observation, that just is untenable.
yeah, I think it's an arbitrary assertion to say that a thing might possibly be able to act in contradiction to its nature. And I think it is
No, no,
just,
no. I'm not saying it's acting in contradiction to its nature. I'm saying it's acting in contradiction to your understanding of its nature. I think we don't
ah,
have a full
so
understanding of
you're
things'
saying we
natures.
can't know the nature of things.
I'm saying, in your view, if you want to say that our understanding of natures comes from observations, then one must be open-minded and say, well, I don't rule out of hand that this is the inherent way that things must be, or that's the inherent way things must be. I just notice regular patterns, and I'm totally open to the idea that sometimes wild things happen. Every once in a while, a gigantic volcano goes off. Like, it doesn't happen all the time, but it does every once in a while. Every once in a while, an asteroid strikes. Okay, yeah, that
Yeah,
happens every once in a while. Maybe
I
there's a
have.
whole world of things that only happen once every 1,000 years, and you're just
Yeah,
ruling. You're
but
just
those when a volcano erupts or an asteroid strikes, these aren't violations of the laws of identity or causality.
I'm not saying
Um,
any violations of identity. Let me say it in the most provocative way I can. I interpret as unbelievable, astronomical hubris to imagine that somebody can say, "I have observed the inherent nature of a thing, and am a priori ruling out the possibility that it could ever behave in a way that I have never observed."
yeah.
Or that somehow the case is closed, that things could behave in a way different than I have previously observed. That is the most anti-empirical, arrogant argument I can imagine. How do you know the
So
natures of things? If it's through
you're
observation,
conf-
then your position is it should be, I will simply observe and see what happens. And if everybody says a miracle happened, water turned into wine, in a very unusual circumstance that only happens once every few millennia, okay, well, apparently that is part of the nature of things because so many people observed it according to that epistemic criteria.
so I think you're conflating things that I'm not. I'm not saying that things can't act in ways that I haven't observed. That would be ridiculous. I'm saying
Okay.
that things can't act in contradiction to their natures.
Okay.
And you're, I think,
And where do
saying
you get
that it's hubris. And you're saying it's hubris for me to say that we can sufficiently know the nature of something to say that it can't act in one way versus another, that and so we can have absolute certainty about the nature of something and how it can and cannot act. And I
if
think you're
if
saying to
the
me that I should
criteria
have an
is
open,
yes, of course.
you're saying I
If
should have an
in
open mind.
if your criteria is that we learn about the nature of things via observation, that's your
Mhm.
stated criteria. I'm
Yeah.
saying, well, the nature of observing is not that you rule out possibilities a priori. The nature of observing is to say, every once in a while, something bizarre happens. This is, if
Well,
you
first of
now,
all, I'm not saying that we rule out anything a priori, just to be clear.
no, that is what you're saying, because you're saying
No,
miracles are by
no,
definition impossible. And you gave the example of a miracle of something miraculous happening to a stick. And when I'm saying, oh, it's a latent possibility that on occasion, in the right circumstances, sticks transform into something else. I've never personally seen it, but maybe that's a
okay.
latent
So you're
possibility.
arguing for the possibility of miracles.
In I'm The reason I'm hesitant in answering is because the way that you framed miracles being some logically impossible thing that violates identity. No, I'm
What?
arguing for the reality of it is entirely reasonable to think that we do not understand how the material world works. And so there's going to be, just like primitive people we've already established would look at things that are happening at present as being miraculous and magical. I'm going to say, yeah, we're in the exact same position that if you have some ultra advanced alien that comes down that's been developing for a billion years more than we have, I think they could actually turn water into wine. Why? Because, well, it seems to me that it would be a
True.
latent possibility of understanding of the material world, that the material world can transform in ways that we don't understand. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, we've seen that time and again, but it
Okay.
always happens through causal processes that are
Okay.
based on the identities of the objects. So
Okay.
the facts of reality, let me get a word in here. The facts of reality that give rise to the need of the concept of miracle is that some people claim that things happen that are not in line with the identity of the things in question. So, for instance,
Mhm.
in the Old Testament, Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt. Let's
Uh-huh.
just focus on that.
Uh-huh.
So, a woman turns into a pillar of salt just
Yeah.
instantaneously.
Sure.
Now, if your position is, well, look, you should have an open mind to the
Yeah.
possibility of that, I will bring in what I think is the correct approach to these kinds of things, and that is not an open mind which permits anything to come in. Well, maybe that's possible, maybe that's possible. I think you should have an active mind which says, look, things are what they are, they act in accordance with their natures, and a woman cannot instantaneously turn into a pillar of salt because she has a nature and a pillar of salt has a nature, and they have nothing to do with each other.
Oh, well, that's just
So,
totally that's completely wrong, and I would stress
okay.
the arrogant that the position of arrogance is unbelievable. So let me give you a couple of examples here. So
Okay.
from my recollection, there's stories of in the Old Testament that there's a plague or whatever, and then there's a plague of frogs, and the frogs are falling from the sky, right? And I could sit here and say, well, if you understand the nature of frog and you understand the nature of sky, of course, frogs cannot fall from the sky. That doesn't make any sense. Well, but there is a weird exception. If one is open-minded to these types of wild things happening, one will discover that on occasion there are these weird uh, uh, anomalies where you get like a tornado that happens over a pond or a body of water, and the tornado will then suck up all the sea creatures up into the sky. And you can go on YouTube and watch videos of like squid and frogs raining from the sky on people's cars, and there's windshield wipers with sea creatures coming down. So when you're talking about a pillar of salt, I'm saying, oh, okay, well, that's look. Could an individual, could a woman transform into a pillar of carbon? Yeah. Why? Well, there's some extreme lightning experience, but we don't understand ball lightning, for example, at all. We don't understand electricity for that matter at all. So in extreme circumstances, she's at the wrong place in the wrong time. She can certainly turn into a pillar of carbon. Why not a pillar of salt? Under some extreme circumstances, it happens. Let's say it's happened once, and
Yeah.
the person got hit by the bolt of lightning, and they were standing over the geothermal vent, such that blah 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 blah. The chemical composition of her
Okay.
body changed into a pillar of salt. That happened
Let
once.
me ask. Let me just ask sort of a razor type question here because I think we're agreeing in one sense and not in another. I'm saying things can only happen if they are in concert with the nature of the entities that act. And so, for instance, if a tornado comes over a pond and pulls a bunch of pond creatures up into the sky, and therefore they rain down on the party next door, and you go, oh my goodness, look, it's raining frogs. That's all a causal process based on the actual nature of entities that
Yeah,
exist. So
that's right.
things being
Yeah,
what they are and acting in accordance with their natures.
yeah.
Are
Okay.
you telling me that all of the things that we call miracles from the Bible are simply instances of that? So when Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt, that there was a causal, understandable mechanism there. It wasn't just so it wasn't a miracle, it was causation.
Well, I agree with that until the very last way that you framed it, that it wasn't a miracle. That is what a miracle is. For
So
example, the
miracles are
parting.
miracles are in line with the law of causality, is what you're saying.
I don't like the law of causality because you're baking in a bunch of heavy metaphysics about what objects are and what natures are. That's going to be really hard to sort out. Uh, there are no contradictions. I'm comfortable with that. So, for example, the parting of the Red Sea. Moses raises his hands and then he slams his staff down, and then the seas part, and then they cross the Red Sea. And then as they get to the other side of the Red Sea, as he's being pursued by Pharaoh, the waters crash together and kill all the chariots. Okay, well, sounds totally ridiculous until you learn about downdrafts. Well, you can have hurricane force winds that do blow straight down and on occasion do apparently part waters. The idea that it's going to be, a sea, wow, that would be quite a miracle. But yeah, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be a completely understandable way of understanding what miracles are. Now, there are different features, there are different aspects of these types of miracles which are very important. For example, I don't know if you've looked into the what is it called, the miracle at Fatima. Have you heard about this, with the sun
Don't think
dancing in the sky? This one? Okay, this is a so I went down the rabbit hole of these miracles, and most of them I tend to be extremely skeptical. And this one was in the early 20th century. Long story short, there were thousands and thousands of people that reported seeing the sun dance around in the sky, and then they say it made a closer pass to people, and their clothes got dried because it was rainy, and then their clothes got toasted, and it was this very bizarre, very well recorded miracle. And I have certain intuitions about what was going on there. I think one could call them naturalistic. I'm not sure. Would strongly recommend people investigate this topic if they're interested, with an open mind, and not saying, "Oh, if you understand natures, this can't happen." Like, well, reality is wild. Wild things have happened. Just investigate them and see if it reveals more about the inherent capacity of nature that perhaps meets the eye. Um, the most miraculous, in my view, and confusing, bewildering, bizarre phenomenon here, and in other cases of miracles, is that there appears to be some sort of corresponding phenomena where you have these events that are coupled with knowledge that seems like individuals shouldn't have. So with the miracle of Fatima, the other part of the story is that, like, for I want to say 6 months at least, there were these shepherd kids that were claiming they were having interactions with the Virgin Mary, and the Virgin Mary was telling her for 6 months that this event was going to happen, or some special event was going to happen. It had some relation with World War II. And you're like, okay, what the hell's going on there? But sure enough, at the end of the day, not only do you have the natural phenomena to explain, which is thousands of people, and this is like well recorded and established, seeing this thing that one doesn't normally see. Then you have to explain, well, how do you have children that are predicting it's going to happen 6 months in advance? Um, there are ways to try to explain it. If you want to be fanciful, you could say, oh, maybe they were aliens, or maybe there's all kinds of ways we can try to explain what's going on, but they're all so out of the ordinary that they certainly qualify as miraculous. Last thing I'll say on this is, if we return to Moses slamming his staff down and then seas parting, well, I could say, well, there's a downdraft. There's a downdraft it was a hurricane force wind straight down, which is how they crossed the Red Sea. Okay, that seems reasonable to me. Then you also have the additional problem, which is, okay, but here's this man who had faith, that somehow God was going to provide and perform a miracle on demand that rescued rescued his people from the Egyptians that were pursuing them, and that it actually happened, right? If you accept the plausibility of the story, like imagine it actually is the case that we live in a universe in which you've got this Moses leader, and he claims to have this knowledge that we don't know how he has the knowledge. He actually slams his staff down, the seas part, they cross, and imagine that that actually happened. So I'm going to say there's no violation of causality there. There's no logical contradiction there. It would just reveal that we don't understand much. There are multiple layers of how the material world operates and how the informational world operates that we don't understand at all. So that would be my position on miracles.
Yeah, I think we fundamentally disagree there. I think I maintain that you're conflating miracles with causation, and that the reason we need the two separate concepts is because they're different things.
Yeah,
But
but
that's
just so
okay.
that you can rule out miracles, that's what I'm saying. You're ruling them out a
Well,
priori.
the
What's the
purpose is
point of
not
that?
to rule out miracles. The purpose is to keep our minds connected to reality and not to be waylaid by stories, including testimony about things that can't happen. So
Wow.
that's where I,
It's just
and
things
if you
can't
think
happen.
that's
Here, it hath
yeah
been
if you
declared, these things cannot happen.
yeah if you
Wow, you
think
have
that's
such
you
knowledge.
if you think that's hubris, so be it.
10 out of
I'm
10.
fine. Yeah, yeah.
And
Let's talk
simultaneously,
about.
you also say, I will say, you're also claiming not to want to talk about physics. So here you have very, very strong a priori judgments about what is possible in the material world, and yet you don't even want to talk about physics. Physics is a wild and incredible place where
I'm
things
not.
that are happening
I'm
all
not.
the time. Yeah,
I'm not equipped. Yeah, you're. I think
I
you're
agree
misunderstanding
with
me.
that. I'm just saying
I'm not
that
equipped to talk about physics.
if you recognize that you're not equipped to talk about physics, which is a critical feature of how the material world operates, you are not in a
Mhm.
place to talk about the inherent nature of things that you think are discovered via observation. That should be very obvious.
I think you're. I think you're wrong on that count too. I think you can talk about the philosophic axioms such as existence, identity, causation, and the like, without knowing physics. And what you can say about physics from the outside, what I can say about physics from the outside, is that physicists and physical properties have to be in line with the fundamental principles of reality, philosophy being the basic science. And that's all that philosophers get to say about physics. What physicists observe and what they can calculate and do is their business, and it's a very complex subject that I'm not an expert in. So I'm not going to go outside of my lane and talk about something I don't
But
know.
of course,
But what I
but by
will
by
let me finish.
declaring what is logically impossible in the domain of physics, you're going to
Yeah,
say is
it,
not doing. You don't have an opinion on physics, and yet you're going to say what is and isn't physically possible.
yeah, the laws of identity and causality don't pertain only to physics. They pertain to everything, and they're very general laws, and they don't
So
they're
water
not
can't
about.
turn into wine, and that is a law that you've discovered this philosophically. Water can't turn into wine under any circumstances.
Water can't turn into wine is not a law. The
Okay.
law is things can act only in accordance with their identities. Now, obviously,
Okay.
you can make wine using water, right? You can squish grapes, and grapes have water in them, in addition to the other elements of what constitutes grape juice, and then you can ferment that, et cetera, et cetera. So you can make wine using water, but water can't just instantaneously turn into wine. And yes, that is subsumed under the law of causality, in my view. I'm okay if we disagree on this. I know, look, if you're Catholic or even moving in that direction, there's no way we're going to agree on this, and I'm
Well, this
fine
is
with that.
completely separate from the Catholic. I mean, this is just straight philosophy. Like, I think your
So
position would be stronger if you want to say we've discovered the final laws of physics in 2026, and here they are, and I'm going to make a case about physics about what and what is not possible. But the simultaneous combination of I know the nature of water and what is inherently materially possible in water under every a context, and I'm not going to make a claim about physics is just
Yeah.
there's a term I forget. Well, yeah, I'm not persuaded by that one. I'm going to say that's an oversight.
Yeah. If there's a causal mechanism that physicists can put their finger on, and if in some future time people can make something happen that looks like water turns into wine instantaneously through a causal mechanism that is
Yeah.
based in the laws of identity and causality, then that would be a different thing. But
Well,
that's
I'm
why I
going to say
think that we need the
is the
concept that,
thing. That is
yeah,
the mature understanding of a miracle. That's the mature understanding. I don't see any reason for any understanding otherwise that says there's some logically contradictory thing. Les, we're just going to. So that's it turns out that's what sophisticated minds have thought about miracles forever. How about that? So
I,
then
I,
now
I
we
don't
say,
think
oh
that's
wow,
true. Yeah.
okay.
I
Well,
don't
so
think
then
it's
we
true
say,
that people have always meant by miracles things acting in accordance with their natures. I think that they've
yeah,
meant
no,
the
that is
opposite.
absolutely the traditional position. Is that in fact, for example, with the Christian story, that Christ is a demonstration of the most advanced form of material transformation that has ever existed on planet Earth. That's the idea. It's actually that the Christian story is about material transformation. Material transformation. That has always been the claim of the Christians, and they want to say in secular language, you could say, well, it's as if Christ was a super advanced alien. Like imagine
Yeah.
that we had an alien that came, who was a billion years more developed than we were. Could he do the types of things that Christ could do? If the answer is yes, or plausibly yes, then that points to a latent capacity in the material world for a whole bunch of miracles that make complete sense. So we can
Let's
move on
take
from
a
that.
concrete on that count straight from Catholicism. So we'll work with transubstantiation.
Sure.
So you eat the bread and you drink the wine, and as you do, they convert into the body and blood of Christ.
Mhm.
Now, so first of all, do you agree that that actually happens?
I don't think it's going to be framed in a way based on how 100% of everything else you've been framing that touches on religious concepts have been framed. I'm going to say that however you're thinking about it is not the way I'm thinking about it. There's no logical contradiction. Let's take a completely different angle on transubstantiation, and it just has to do with set membership. So let's say that you have a wafer, and the wafer is there's a certain set of abstract properties in the wafer, in the piece of bread, and what makes it bread is particularly that it has those properties. So the atoms are relating into one another in such a way that is bread-like. If you want to think about it that way, that's what bread is. And what transubstantiation means is that it's opening up. It doesn't those relations don't change. It still has the structure, the physical structure of bread. That doesn't change. That's also a critical part of the Catholic traditional take. Is like they just call that the appearance, not the substance. The appearance doesn't change, and that just means the material composition is in fact the same. It is participating, however, in a higher set, a higher form. It is participating in God after its consecration. So you still have the material arrangement the way that it was, and it does become body and blood in the Catholic view because it's participating in a higher set of relations. So I don't know if that makes sense, and if it doesn't, I can continue explaining more.
Well, I don't think you're going to make sense of transubstantiation to me.
Did that not make
I just
sense? What
think
I just said?
no, because what the concept of participation is attempting to do a lot of work, but doesn't really, in my view, do any. So either
Well, we could talk
the
about that. That's
well,
important. So let's say part. So does it make sense when I use the language? Let's say participating in love. Does that way of talking make sense? So if I would say like a child reaches a milestone when it participates in love for the first time. Does
I'd
that way of
love to talk
talking
about
make sense?
love. I'd love to talk about love, but I want to finish with transubstantiation first because I think it goes to the core of what we're talking about. When someone eats bread and drinks wine, does it turn into the body and blood of Christ as they eat it?
Do you okay? Yes, right. So I'm trying to ask what is unclear about what I've just said. When I'm talking about when you say turned into, so I'm using different language here. This is going to say let's put on our Platonic metaphysic hat, and let's use that language because it's actually very sensible. Okay, so this is why I use the example of love and participation in love, because if we get this participation concept, then the transubstantiation thing isn't actually an issue. So if I say you've got, it doesn't have to be love in particular. It could be participating in anger. There's a way we can talk about um, a an entity participating in some higher pattern. So just like I could say, when I feel rage, I'm talking about participating in a pattern, or I can talk about it as participating in a pattern. When you feel rage, there's a certain abstract pattern that you're participating in. I think that's a fine. I think that's fair to say that's a fine way of talking. So with the idea of transubstantiation, the idea is, well, the wafer is participating in a higher form in a way that it wasn't prior to its consecration. That's all. So,
Yeah. See,
okay,
none of that makes
let
any,
me give a
none of that makes any
completely.
sense to me.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good. Okay, let me okay, great. Let's see. Just give me 1 second, and I'll have a better non-religious analogy, and I think this will make
All right.
sense. If the issue is that it literally doesn't make sense to you, then I think we can clear that up. Okay. Um, okay. So imagine I have an heirloom from my parents, and it's let's see, I wish I had something nearby. All right, this is a completely ridiculous example, but just to visualize, I've got a roll of duct tape here. Okay, now imagine I said, the story of the duct tape is unfortunately, both my parents have passed away, but before they passed away, they gave me this roll of duct tape. All right, so this means something. This is very special to me. This is not an interchangeable roll of duct tape with any other. This is something I'm going to set it aside. I'm going to actually put this in a room on an altar. I'm going to tell my kids, um, uh, this is unique. I've said, don't mess with it because it has a higher meaning than a regular roll of duct tape. Okay, that's understandable. I think everything that I said is understandable. Now think about how the children will relate to the duct tape that's on the altar that Dad has said, don't mess with it. Well, they're going to start interacting with this in a different way than they otherwise would, because it has been set aside in some unique sense. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm going to say that what has happened is what Dad has said is this is participating in a abstract structure of value that says this is actually really important. This is something that's really, really important. It's also causally efficacious when I talk this way, because the kids, let's say, are actually changing their behavior
Yeah.
in relation to it. Okay, well, that makes sense. Then a way of talking is to say that this is participating in the pattern of sacredness. It's participating in a pattern, a higher abstract pattern of being sacred. And that has meaning. That's not totally ridiculous or impossible. Okay. So this is distinct from any other roll of duct tape. That those other rolls of duct tape are not, in fact, participating in that higher pattern. Right. So there's a real difference between the two. And the inaugural event that brought this roll of duct tape and brought it up to being sacred was I consecrated it, let's say, by saying, this is very important to me. My parents gave this to me. Please treat it with respect, and so on. And so at time one, it was not a sacred thing. At time two, it did become a sacred thing, and it even has causal impact on the world in a way that it wouldn't otherwise have. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't think anything that I've said is incomprehensible. So
No,
we'll just
that's all.
take.
That all
Okay.
Tracks. Yep.
Okay. So let's just port that onto what's going on with the consecration of the host and the breaking of the bread in the Christian idea. There is a ritual in which says with this piece of bread is now participating in divinity. It's participating in something that is sacred, but sacred at the highest level. The Catholic idea of God is one in which God is inherently everywhere, by definition, and so that host is set aside to be participating in the higher pattern, and then you take that higher pattern and you get to ingest it. You get to participate in this religious ritual such that you are now participating in the divine at a material corporal level in a way that you're not when you just eat a loaf of bread off the shelf from the grocery store. Okay,
Okay.
does that not make sense?
No, that completely does not track with the example that you set up in my mind. So, a couple things. First of all, we're just
Okay.
throwing in arbitrary things like higher order and God and all of that, when the question is simply, does the bread turn into body and does the wine turn into blood? And I think you're using a lot of words and a lot of effort to it seems like to try to answer that in an indirect way, but I think why not just answer it in a direct way? Either the bread turns to body and the wine turns to blood, or it doesn't. Law of excluded middle. So which one would you say it is?
So so imagine I so when you're talking about body and blood of an entity which is divine, it's
See, this is
obviously
where these concepts just lose me completely. You say
okay.
divine,
Yeah.
and I get, and the concept is just this floating abstraction. And I know what you're trying to mean by it. You're trying to say that well, it relates to God, but
No, okay,
let's define God.
okay, let's say it relates to love. All right. So this is I mentioned I had a religious experience, right? This religious experience was the experience of true love for the first time. Totally revelatory. Completely upended my life and my philosophy
It'll
about
do
everything.
that. It'll do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, good thing.
so I'm going to say that true love is good. If there's anything that's good, love is good. Okay. Now, it's also a traditional idea in philosophy, and Platonic philosophy in particular, that says the highest good is the form of the good, the highest, like goodness itself. They would say traditionally that has been associated with God. Okay, God being the form of the good is one of the just a traditional idea in philosophy. Makes total sense if one is able to understand Platonic metaphysics with the reality of abstractions existing outside the
I
mind.
dispute that metaphysics. Do you want me to jump in on that, or do you want to finish
No,
your thought
no,
on that? Okay.
no. Let's
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, let's well
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
so we say uh love is good, and what is truly good is divine. Here's another way of putting it. Let's say that which has objective value is good, true objective value. Love has true objective value, therefore love is good. And if there is a candidate, if anything is divine, it would be that which is objectively morally good. And again, this is like a traditional approach. So hang on, we're just tying it to love here. So we say, oh,
Okay.
okay, well, maybe what's going on is the Christians are saying that love is the form of the good. Love is God. God is love. That's also like in the book of John. That's a traditional take. God is love. Okay, so then if that's true, and I think that's reasonable, rational, then when you are participating in this religious ritual, the idea is that you are participating, you have some access to divine love via that religious ritual. And so when we say, you know, does it transform into the body and blood? Okay, well, understand the idea is that God is love, that this character of Christ would be an instantiation of love, of the divine. That character instituted a religious ritual for everybody to participate in. I'm not even Catholic yet, for the record, so I haven't even participated in this, but this is just my understanding of of it. I think it's quite beautiful and plausible. I'm looking forward to participating in it. And because the character of Christ is divine, the idea his body and blood is different in some essential way than regular body and blood. So when you set it up, well, does it turn it to body and blood? Well, it's a little bit different when you're talking about a character of this magnitude. Yes, it's the body and blood. I think it's more of a way of talking. I mean, it's not that it turns into like red blood cells. It doesn't turn into flesh in the regular material sense that you're thinking about it. But the way that the traditional way of talking about the transformation after that religious ritual is that piece of bread is now participating in divinity, in love, in a way that it wasn't prior to it. That's all.
Okay. So I
Does
don't
it make
track
sense
the
though?
way that you're.
So
Pardon?
what part in that would you say that's the thing that you lost me? Like that one didn't make sense.
Yeah, I don't understand why you're bringing concepts such as divinity and Jesus and God and any of that into the question of bread and wine being consumed. And I also don't understand. I mean, love and
Okay.
good and value, three concepts you used, are very important, and I am a huge champion of them. So to love is to
Okay.
value intensely. For something to be good requires that it be good to us, to someone, and for some purpose. There's no floating good. There's no platonic. So I don't know whether you're a Platonist. It sounds like you might be. There's no platonic good in my view that's just out there. Good is a relational concept. It always assumes good to whom and for what. So it's got to
Yeah.
be good to an agent and for some purpose.
Yeah.
Likewise for value, which is another concept you used.
Yeah.
And none of this, in my view, has anything to do with an alleged divine or
Yeah.
God being. They're
Okay.
just facts about reality that human beings can identify so that we can live. So I
Okay.
just
Okay.
don't understand why you bring in the divine language.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a few things. Let me try to answer that one, and then more on the actual ritual, because I think there's history here that is going to answer some questions of why it seems so weird to talk about bread and wine, and then you're like mixing a bunch of concepts. Well, it makes more sense in like the context of ancient Judaism, why that ritual is the way that it is. But why? So why say that love is divine? Okay. Yeah, so I am very much
Well, that's not the question I'm asking so much. So let me just
okay.
be clear. Uh, I mean, I don't think you need to say that love is divine, unless you want to use divine in a secular term, as a secular term, which would be fine. Love is divine, meaning it's supremely important. But if by divine you mean relates to God, I don't know why we need the hypothesis. I'll just bring in La Paz. I have no need of that hypothesis. Why are we even talking about God? Why not just say, look, love is important because it means to value things intensely. So I love my wife. I love my daughter. I love my career. I love my hobbies. I value things intensely. So this is a very spiritual thing to me. It's of the mind. It's of the soul. It's of the spirit. All of this, in my view, is about secular elements of the human being. And I can talk about all of it very passionately and warmly without bringing in the hypothesis of God. That's what I don't understand, is why you're bringing God in at all. Why do you need the hypothesis?
Yeah, my guess is that it's a similar thing to what's going on earlier, where just like with miracles, the way that you're defining things makes them irrational or something. It's the same thing with God. You say you can talk about all these things without invoking God. Yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with a Sunday school conception of God, fine. It's a person in the sky with a beard or something. But I'm gonna
How do you
reject the
define God?
premise. I'm gonna reject the premise that you can have virtually any discussion about truth or reality without God. I think that God is the source of being and or is the necessary self-existent being that gives rise to all other structure and order in reality. That I think of things hierarchically, right? You've got God at the top, necessarily self-existent being without which nothing would exist, nothing would make sense. And then you have a whole bunch of lesser beings that are not necessarily self-existent that ultimately get their existence from God.
Why
So,
do you
so
think you need the God for that? Why not just say existence exists and the things that we perceive and interact with are just primary? Existence is primary. Again, this seems like senseless duplication to me. You're
it's not.
taking this complex world and trying to explain it, and instead of explaining it by reference to the things we can observe, you're making up something that you say explains it, but that just kicks the
No,
can down the road.
no, it's just the same thing because the conception of God that you're working with is very, very elementary. So why
Is your
posit?
conception
Look,
of
hang
God
on.
the creator of all being and the maker of moral law?
The- God is the peak of the metaphysical hierarchy. So it must be the case that there is a self-existent being that does not depend on anything else for its existence. That is the
And
ground
that
of
thing has to be
everything
something
else.
other than existence? And that has to be something
That
other than
is
existence?
existence is not separate from God. It's not a separate thing from God. It's
But
not it's not
if
like
every
there's
time you're
God over
talking,
here and there's existence over here. No, if you want to say, what this would be a reasonable thing to do, if you want to say that uh, baked into reality, baked into existence, are transcendent necessary properties of atemporality. You might even say of omnipresence, right? You can't have existence without existence, which gets you to something like omnipresence as well. The omnipresence of existence is like the omnipresence of God.
so existence
By
exists.
understand,
I can say that and agree with it. I
yes.
just don't know why you need a God beyond that.
Well, because what
I don't
I'm
understand
saying
the
is
facts that give rise to the need of that whole thing.
I don't get the impression that you care to in this conversation. I get the impression that you keep looping on a really bad conception of God and a really bad conception of miracles. So it's not surprising to me at all that you're not able to make sense of this. You're not trying to make sense of it. You're taking very low
I,
level arguments and you're engaging with those. I'm trying to give you a high level argument. I'm trying to say that existence itself has transcendent aspects to it that we call
such
God.
as what?
Atemporality. We don't, for example, we don't see in our experience, we don't understand atemporality. We don't interact with atemporality. Our experience is changeable. It must be that somehow there's another side of the coin of existence, which is atemporality and unchangeability, because otherwise you get logical problems, you get paradoxes. Okay, so
I don't.
that's
Yeah, I'm not tracking you there. I don't understand why you think there has to be something called atemporality, unless by that you mean that the universe is
You just
eternal.
said
So
it's
it
eternal. Okay, so either eternal is an attempt to get at the idea of atemporality. Now it's a failed attempt because you end up with an infinite regress problem. But it's still the attempt to try to say, well, maybe those transcendent features that are described that are attributable to God, those are really attributable to existence. And I would say, yeah, but that's because these concepts merge, that actually there is a sophisticated understanding of God in which one will see all of the unique properties of existence. Like for example, okay, this is a great way of putting it. Okay, we are not familiar with uh, existence, which is um, let's say has the power to perpetuate its own existence. So like when we're interacting, I've got a bunch of papers around me. I can just rip and destroy them, no issue. We don't interact with uh, we don't have any sensations of or experiences where we're dealing with like necessarily self-existent entities. That doesn't even make sense. Everything seems to be contextual and relative and changeable, and yet it must be that that property of being fully self-existent, not being relative, not being contextual, not being dependent on anything else, not being touchable, that is either a necessary feature of existence or a necessary feature of God, right? You can't escape from those properties being necessary. Okay, so what I'm saying is, it should be noted that one is still trying to ascribe, I would say, the properties of God to nature, because you end up just through simple introspection understanding, well, you need eternality. We don't get the present. We don't have any explanation for the phenomena at present without eternality. And I'm going to say eternality is not something we deal with. We don't know what that really means. And yet you're saying, well, something has to be eternal. Right. And that's the intuition that everybody has had for thousands of years. And it is one of the things that is described and attributed to God.
I just
Not a
don't.
Sunday school
I have
God.
no problem with eternality. I think existence is eternal, but I don't understand why you're assuming that there's got to be some other being or dimension that
I'm not.
makes
Why
existence
does it have
eternal.
to be another dimension? What I'm trying to say is
That's what
the
I'm trying to.
relationship between God and reality is such that you have no existence without it participating in being. There's no such, it is incomprehensible, incoherent to talk about existence outside of its being.
So let me just see if I get this straight. Are you saying that God and being are the same thing?
So the traditional way of putting it is that God is the source of being, and depending on what school you want to subscribe to, yes, you could think of God as being ultimately being itself.
Okay. I'll take it either way. If God is being, then we don't need the concept of God because we already have the concept of being. If God is the source, if God is the source of being, then we're saying that something has to have created being, and that thing is God, in which case you're getting to special pleading, because then on that premise, you have to say, well,
No,
if God exists, who created God? So
no,
I just
no.
don't
That's no.
understand.
Sorry. Let's take that second one, because
Okay.
this is also elementary. Okay, the idea is not that somebody. It's not that, well, if you have being, you have to have a creator for being, but then you have to ask, who created the creator? No, that's not good. The argument is, if you have being and you need an explanation for being, you can only find it logically in necessarily self-existent being.
Why do you need an explanation for being? Why not just start with being and say that that's
Because we're trying to explain things, because the attempt of doing philosophy and theorizing and thinking is to explain things. And we have this thing that needs explanation, which is being. Why is there something? And you want to say, well, there's something
on
because
that?
there's something. I'm going to say, well, that's not an explanation. So for
But
people
if
who
you
are
take that
looking for
premise,
and if you
if you take
take,
that premise and
yes,
you say God
yeah,
exists, then we're going to have to say what explains God.
no,
You
please
either
listen. Okay, we have
you've
2
got a
minutes left.
starting
We have
point
2 minutes
somewhere,
left.
right?
Please listen to what I'm saying. This is
I'm trying.
crystal clear. This is
Yeah, go
crystal
ahead.
clear, okay? If we're trying to explain being, we are forced to explain being ultimately to terminate the infinite regress problem by saying there must be necessarily self-existent being, right? That does
I'm
not
fine with
mean
that.
so imagine responding to that by saying, well, who created the necessarily self-existent being? And I say, well, you don't understand what is meant by necessarily self-existent being. That is
You're
the
Yeah,
explanation for being, is that ultimately it has to be grounded in necessary self-existence.
yeah,
That's what is
that's
called God.
defining God into existence. That's
that
really
is
what that
that
is.
is uh, no, that's not defining God into existence. That is saying it must therefore be that in order to make sense of being, there is necessarily self-existent being,
Yeah.
which has been labeled God. It's arriving at that conclusion via reasoning, not via definition. It's via necessity.
Yeah, I think we disagree there. I think existence is necessary. There's no
Right.
alternative to it.
There's no
There's
alternative. That's right.
the
So in other words,
alternative.
you
Yeah,
also arrive at the conclusion.
if you ask me the question why, let me answer it. The reason there's no alternative to existence is because the only possible alternative would be non-existence, and to say that that could be is to say that nothing is a special kind of something. This is why. This is reification of the zero. You're not getting anywhere with that. It's not true that there's no reality, and it's not true that there's two realities, both God and this one. In my view, there's just this reality, and this is the starting point. It's the ground for everything that we're trying to figure out. And when we're trying to think, we should be identifying facts by their relationships to the fundamental facts about this reality in which we live. So that's why, and my mind keeps coming back to this. I know we differ on this, and I'm not trying to put you in a corner. I'll give you the last word here too.
You're not putting me in a corner. I assure you that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
That is not what's going on. You've said, well, in my view, existence is necessary. Well, okay, in my view too, as well, and in the view of everybody who's thought about it more or less for a few thousand years, that is also correct. Yes, existence ends up having to be necessary. Yes, so contingent being. This is why I'm glad you agree with the argument from contingency. This is why contingent being does not explain itself, and therefore you end up with the traditional understanding of God. Now, I understand that's not palatable because you've contented yourself with trying to refute juvenile understandings of God, but this is the old school understanding that you have affirmed on multiple cases, that in fact to think otherwise is impossible. It would entail maybe a logical contradiction, because it would be non-existence, but non-existence can't exist. It's like, yeah, this is St. Thomas Aquinas is going to end up very strongly agreeing with you here.
So, given that you think that I've only refuted, juvenile understanding of God, just before we go, what is the sophisticated understanding of God that you are arguing for?
God is the ground of being. If you want to say God is the necessarily self-existent being, I like that as well. I think that's good. And God is an answer to all of the infinite regress problems. God is the answer to the problem of the contingency. And that's sort of the just purely rationalistic arguments for God. I think that's fine. I think that's a great place to start. I would also say that it turns out that there's a revelatory aspect of reality that we learn through experience, which is that I'm not going to everything that I said about the philosophical argument for God, I'm just going to appeal to pure reason and say that kind of case closed. You end up just through logical analysis, you end up concluding these things. There's the Christian claim, which I would say is I'm going to say it with less epistemic confidence, because I don't think pure logic gets you here. But I do think that the revelatory truth is that God turns out to be love also. That the ground of being in that we are all participating in turns out to be love and the love relation, which is like the best thing. If that's true, that's essentially the best conceivable possibility. I do believe that's true, but again, it's of less epistemic certainty than the other claims about God.
All right. Well, I told you I would give you the last word, and I will. We should talk another time if you're interested about dualism, because I think we touched on that early. You asked whether I was a materialist, I think, and I'm not. I believe, as I think you can probably surmise, in body and mind, matter and spirit, and I think that could be an interesting discussion as well. We probably would agree on some things and disagree there. So maybe we'll do that another time.
Maybe. I have to think about it.
All right, man. Well, Steve, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it. It was an interesting conversation. We didn't really get to morality. In fact, we didn't get to it at all. but we can do that another time too if you're interested.
Yeah, that's how these things go. Generally, you want to talk about one topic, but really there's like 15 more urgent things that have to be discussed anyway. So thank
Here,
you.
here. All right. Take care.